we are module 6 right now, moving right along. We start the Republic. Plato's Republic. Your reading responses are right there. Looks like just about everybody's responded to them, which is super. And then our next papers are not due till November 10th. You have a little bit of time. So the next papers are going to be due after the Republic. I'm going to have a different kind of format in mind for these papers, a different kind of approach and goal. Okay. Anybody have any questions about any of that business before we dive into the Republic? Robert shaking his head. All good. All right. Cool. So, oh, I got to do the roster. Silly me. Mike.
Here.
Yo, Mike.
Here. Can you hear me?
Mike. Audra.
Present.
Here.
Am I on mute? Can somebody speak?
Hello.
I can hear you.
Bloody hell. How come I'm not getting any? Oh, let me try this again. Mike.
Yes. Can you hear me this time?
Got it. Woo.
All right.
I had it on mute. That was terrifying. Audra.
Here.
Nice. Sunny. Still in the laundry room. Is
Here.
is with us. Sid. Hey, Sid. Anna.
Here.
Whoa. Echo, echo, echo. Lydia.
Here.
Kelly.
Here.
Hi. Victoria.
Here.
Izzy.
Here.
Cameron.
Here.
Gotcha. How about Kieran?
Hello.
Hi. Rowena.
Here.
Nora.
Here.
Henry.
Here.
Samantha.
Here.
How about Lauren?
Here.
Vivian.
Here.
Hi. Lan.
Here.
Was subdued. Robert is here. I'm looking at him. Otto. Is Otto here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there we go. And William.
Here.
Great. All right. So the Republic. Today we're going to look at the Republic. The Greek title. Republic is Latin. The Greek title is Politeia. Politeia. It's where we get the word polity from, which is polity is kind of a technical form for a political state. So we get the word politics in English. The word politics comes from the Greek. You know, throughout this class, we were referring to in Greek, the city is the polis. But polis or politeia, you know, these terms are interchangeable. It refers to a political state that maybe is anchored on a city, but not exhausted by a city. So Athens was considered a politeia, was considered a polity. But Athens was more than just a city. It commanded like a mini empire around it. The term in English now, what we have come to know this book as is the Republic. And Republic is how the Romans translated, Republic is a Latin word, and that's how the Romans translated polis in Greek, or polity. And republic is a very strange word. It is actually two. It is the re publica. It is the public. Literally translates as the public thing. So a state is a republic is a public thing. Very strange term. It suggests that there's something inherently political about the notion of public. Regardless, that's just a few words about this translation, about the title. We don't know exactly when this work was written. Scholars agree that it is a later work of Plato. It's his longest complete work. All the other dialogues are quite short. We'll be looking at one other dialogue in this class called the Phaedrus, which is one of his famous works on the topic of love. And but most of his dialogues are much shorter. This in a way, the Republic is a collection of dialogues, you might say. And I often treat it as that because each of the 10 books of the Republic are about dialogue length. It's a very, I find it, I mean, it's a very compelling work. I find it somewhat mysterious. I've taught this book for many years. Every time I teach it, I see something new in it. So it is very peculiar the way this book keeps revealing things. Just when you think you have Plato figured out, he is slippery. And I just have one word of warning as you read this book. Beware that be careful that you think you have him figured out or pinned down. Because I've started to read a lot more irony in this book over the years, especially when we get to book 5 and he talks about some of the more absurd or radical provisions for this polity, this polis, this republic. Okay. Does anybody have any general questions or comments before we dive in to the substance here? Anybody want to speak to how this read compared to what we read so far? Kelly?
I think this one was a bit more difficult to read, mostly because sometimes I get confused on who was talking at the moment.
Good. That's a good point. A little bit confusing sometimes to follow who is the speaker. Any other observations? Yeah, go for it, Lydia.
I'm kind of understanding more in depth why the people in Athens really hated Socrates, because he's kind of getting on my nerves a lot.
Oh no, you have a lot more time to spend with him. This is a
I
bad
know. I
time.
think
Oh
it's
shit.
almost charming, but like it's also like, yeah, I understand. I get it.
Okay, Robert.
I feel like this dialogue was very monologue heavy. Like whenever someone would speak, they would speak for a really long time.
Yes. Yeah. Good. And as I promised you, we have to get to the bottom of why. I mean, why does Plato go through the bother, right? Why not just write a fucking monologue? I mean, seriously. Clearly, he thinks there's something important to the fact that it is a dialogue itself. There's something valuable in dialogue format. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Why dialogue? What's special about dialogue?
It sort of evolves like as the three of them talk, like they're not setting out, it doesn't seem like they're setting out specifically to create a city, but then it kind of morphs into, let's just go with this. And then, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on why dialogue? I mean, we haven't really talked about it, but these would be the absolute worst theater productions ever, right? If your friend says, let's go see a production of The Republic tonight, you need to run the other direction. These would suck on stage. There's no stage directions. Nothing theatrical about them at all. They clearly were not meant for performance. Why dialogue? What is special about dialogue?
I think, oh, I'm sorry. I saw somebody raise their hand, but
Yeah, Kieran, go for it.
I think the dialogue is kind of special in terms of putting the reader at a spot of the jury a little bit. There's nobody defining the conversation or interpreting the conversation, explaining the conversation for the reader, but the reader's just like right in front of the conversation. So I feel like the readers have more freedom to make their own judgment.
That's nice. I like that. Kelly, were you going to say something?
I think it might just feel a bit more intimate and personal, like if you were there with them. I feel like it might be a bit easier to see both sides of the points.
Gotcha. Izzy says you see conflicting ideas. I want to hear more about that in a second, Izzy, but I see Samantha has her hands up. Or hand up, not plural.
I was just gonna say, like, it kind of like the other person talking with Socrates, it kind of like asks the questions as if like the reader would be asking those questions. So it kind of like they're trying to address that so that you understand more of like Socrates' point of view, I feel like.
So maybe it brings you into the dialogue? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
Interesting. Izzy, you want to explain more what your point there? You see conflicting ideas?
Yeah, I mean, with a dialogue, more than one perspective is contributing to the conversation. So you see different points of view and different ideas presented on both sides. And also, it's interesting that it's dialogue because things are kind of broken down and explained in a more casual way. Even though this is olden times, right? So it doesn't seem like it's explained in a casual way to us, but back then I assume it would have been.
Maybe a little more casual. Okay. Anybody else? Well, it occurs to me that we already actually have some valuable insight. We have, I think, the crucial insight into Plato that would help us understand, at least in part, why he insists on dialogue. Although I still agree with, I think it was Robert who pointed out, you know, I'm not sure sometimes that Plato does the most effective job of making this into a real dialogue, you know. But I will say this, some dialogues, maybe you know, his earlier dialogues are more real dialogues than this latter one. With the Republic, you know, and this is something we'll see as we move ahead, Plato has a little bit of a different agenda than he has had earlier. But let's think for a second about the Apology. The Apology is we think his earliest work, it seems to be. And Socrates makes a couple important claims in that work that I think we'll see a little divergence from that here. What was the conclusion? Some of you wrote about this. What was the conclusion of all his interviews? What did he end up learning? What did he end up concluding after his interviews with everybody in the city? The interviews where he annoyed them all to death. What did he end up concluding? Anybody remember? He says that's why he gets a bad reputation. Lauren?
Part of it was that people in positions that are reputed to have a lot of wisdom really don't have any.
Good.
I'm convinced that they do.
And do you remember why he embarks on that interview process in the first place?
The prophecy.
Yeah. What was the prophecy?
The Oracle of Delphi said that he was the smartest of all men.
Wisest, Robert, wisest. And his conclusion. What was his conclusion?
He thought it was wrong, so he wanted to prove it.
Yeah, but what did he conclude in the end? After all his interviews.
Because he didn't assume to know things.
So was he the wisest of all? I know I'm going back to ancient history here, everybody. Was he the wisest of all? What did he conclude? Lauren?
Because he recognizes that he's completely clueless, that makes him the wisest. Like he's not.
He is the wisest.
Knows anything. Yeah.
He is the wisest, and I apologize, Robert, if I didn't hear you say that. He is the wisest, and he's the wisest, remember he tells the jury this, because he's the only one in the whole damn city who knows that he doesn't know. So what's interesting about Socrates' wisdom, Socratic wisdom, at least in the Apology, is that it is agnostic. And what I mean by that is he recognizes his shortcomings. Its principal feature is that he knows what he doesn't know. There is some kind of humility here. We were wrestling with this in the Apology, whether he means it sincerely or not. In the later Plato, we see him back off this a little bit, okay? He seems less reluctant to stick by claims of wisdom. One other point here this is a little bit of a lesser point that we made at the time of the Apology, and I wonder if anybody will remember this, but he aims to draw his distinction from the Sophists. Does anybody remember how, we were dealing with in the Apology? Basically, he says that one of the accusations is that he's accused of being a sophist. And he is not a sophist, and he draws his distinction from them. How? Does anybody remember how in the Apology he distinguishes him? He points out he's not like a sophist. Kelly, do you remember?
Wasn't it because he doesn't get paid?
He doesn't get paid. Yeah, that's it. And he says at that point, effectively, let me hit this other point. What do the Sophists get paid for? Sid.
Oratory, I think.
Careful. They don't get paid to give speeches. They get paid for what?
Teaching and tutoring.
Thank you. At bottom, essentially, the Sophists are teachers. And as everybody knows, teachers are filthy rich. It's outrageous. It's just like absurd how rich teachers are. And we need to put them against the wall and just shoot them. The Sophists were paid for teaching oratory. And part of his distinction between the Sophists is to say, listen, I'm not rich. So here is the key question. Here's the key question, everybody. Is Socrates a teacher? What do you think Plato's position is? Anybody have any thoughts on that? You've read enough of Plato so far, Lauren.
He doesn't seem to be a teacher so much, like at least not intentionally. He seems to be more someone who wants to have conversations and kind of get to the bottom of things rather than, like, at least early on, he becomes kind of more of a teacher, I think, in the Republic. At least it felt like it. But he seems, at least early on, to be more of someone who's like, okay, let's go figure this out by talking with other people.
He wants to get to the bottom of things for whose sake, for whose benefit? Lauren, you want to finish that question? He wants to get to the bottom of things for whose sake or for whose benefit?
Athens in general?
Okay. I thought you were going to say something different. Cameron?
I think the main difference between Socrates and the Sophists was the target audience. I think Socrates more aimed to teach like the men he was talking to that they aren't wise, while the Sophists teach others how to practice their practice.
Mm-hmm. Good. Audra.
I would say that most of this teaching that he's doing is really just a byproduct of his own curiosity and his own attempts to figure out like what things are, and then he has these discussions with people in order to try and figure that out. But in doing so, he's also inadvertently teaching them about the sort of fallacies within their own society.
Good. Thank you, Audra. Yeah. Anna says maybe he's more of a speaker or thinker, but you can learn from that. And Star, Robert, is that your new name, I guess, is an orator. He thinks he's an orator, not a teacher. By and large, you know, yeah, I mean, I think we have to understand that Plato is going to back off the position that Socrates is a teacher. And I was thinking principally of when you know, Lauren and Audra point out that, you know, he's very curious, especially in the Apology, you know, in the Apology, you know, when he embarks on this pursuit to discover, you know, who is wise, the most wise of all, does he look like he's doing people a service? Does he, you know, like, is he trying to serve them or teach them? It seems rather selfish almost. He just wants to figure out like, oh, you are a fucking idiot. The oracle was right, you know, and then walks away like, guess I am the wisest, you know. Yeah, I think, you know, there is his choice for using dialogue is wrapped up with this essential question about whether he is a teacher at all, whether he wants to be a teacher. And the question would be, who is? But then, you know, Anna points out that you can, and I think Audrey points out, you know, he's teaching something along the way. And I guess in you know, Plato is showing his hand here and suggesting a certain philosophy of education. Who is your best teacher? How do people best learn? How do people best learn the kind of stuff that Socrates is trying to get across here? How do you know what I mean? Let's say I got caught up in Anna's point here. Maybe the decision of who's a teacher is based on people who are or aren't learning from them. Anna, what do you mean? I'm not sure I understand that, to be honest.
I mean, I think that people can like self-proclaim themselves teachers and stuff, but whether or not they really are teaching is kind of based on the person who's like receiving their knowledge and if they are actively like choosing to learn from them or not.
Mm. Has anybody here ever been in a lecture-based class? Yeah. I don't know. You guys are sophomores, so I'm not sure how much you've done. Where do you feel like you learn better? Lecture-based or discussion-based?
Discussion based.
I think it depends on the topic. Like the only lectures I've been in are for like math, and you can't really discuss math.
I think it's a combination of the two. Like, if it's something that's really difficult, then maybe a lecture isn't the greatest. But yeah, I guess it just depends.
Hey, Audra, do you still have your hand raised? Did you want to say something?
No, that's just forgot to put it down.
Let me ask this question. What are the benefits of discussion-based learning?
With the lecture, you don't really see, well, speaking from like the teacher's perspective or the speaker's perspective, you don't really see everyone else's ideas, and you're not able to fully articulate your concept if they don't actively participate. Whereas in a discussion, I can bring up like certain points that I don't really understand, and you can sway me to your side.
Good. Cameron.
I was gonna say what he just said, that like it's kind of like why, right? He wrote a dialogue so you can get all kinds of different perspectives and form your own conclusion rather than just getting one conclusion rammed into your head. Like you can derive your own opinion based off like a spectrum of opinions.
Good. Audra, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I was just gonna say more of the same. That like, it's probably when your brain comes to its own conclusions through like following the logic step by step, it's probably more likely to remember it and believe it than if it was just somebody on the street telling you stuff. Like how
in the lecture hall.
Yeah.
We call that spoon-fed. Being spoon-fed as opposed to, you know, the point of discussion-based education is that students have to come to the conclusions themselves, at least in part. And I like what Audra says, you know, that there is a kind of added motivation there. Perhaps. I mean, I can talk personally with you all about why I teach in discussion-based. I figured that if I had to lecture, you guys would all be asleep, you know, but I also don't think that that's important. When I tell people how I teach, I say that I teach in Socratic style. This is described as Socratic style. Okay. Maybe you have other professors who teach this way, but the Socratic style is based, and by the way, if you have any relatives or family members or friends who ever went to law school, they say that law school is Socratic style as well. I haven't been to law school. I had a sister who went there. My understanding that it is, you know, in terms of it's not lecture based. It's question. Law school is pretty high powered or high pressure. Pressure steps out there, and you're supposed to have done these readings of these very complicated cases, and they pose these questions to you, and they are just, you know, you are on the spot, bang, bang, bang. That's not exactly the way I channel Socratic style. The way I understand Socratic style teaching is that, you know, when it comes to, and this is especially related to the topic, right? When it comes to the kinds of things that Plato is talking about, when it comes to the kind of lessons he wants to teach, when it comes to the very personal themes here, moral themes, philosophical themes, these are far more potent when you arrive at them yourselves, especially moral lessons, right? You all are punk rock rebellious artists, right? How do you feel when your parents tell you what to do? You're like, fuck you, right? You're like, don't tell me what to do. Wear a mask, wear a seatbelt, screw you. You know, but if you come to that conclusion yourself, you're like, oh, I guess I better wear a seatbelt, right? You're much more convincing. And, you know, one of the key, here we go, the key Platonic emotion is shame. This comes up over and over again. He wishes to make his audience feel shamed in the apology. And the Gorgias, Callicles, and Paulus indicate that they are filled with shame. And shame is a very peculiar emotion. It suggests you know the right thing to do, but you didn't do it, and you know you were wrong. So shame is an especially humiliating emotion. And these people fucking hate it when Socrates shames them, right? They hate it. And that's why they kill him, right? If you want people to live with their shame, guess what, everybody? Just ask the right questions and let people get there themselves, right? Don't lecture on shame. There you go. Parenting 101. We'll all forget it when we're parents. But, you know. Anybody have any thoughts or questions? I have a little confusing point here. Cameron and Anna, are you in the same room? God, that is so weird. Zoom is so weird. All right. Yeah, I figured. Okay. You could use one screen, you know. It's not like you're social distancing. Yeah. Anna also points out in the format of dialogue or conversation brings the learner audience into an active part of the information exchange. And I think that's important, right? I think that's important. I'm gonna end this discussion of dialogue just by bringing us to one point here. You know, the early wisdom traditions, there is at least one other very notable parallel, and that is in Buddhism, where the Buddha says, essentially, he tells his students that he says, "I am not your teacher." You know, the Buddha says this in a variety of different ways. The Buddhists have a saying: "If you see the Buddha on the road, kill him." And the point being that or they have another saying, you know, "You shall have no guru." Because that suggests then that you are going to be relying on someone else. And the Buddha puts a premium on self-direction and self-discipline and self-realization. And the worry is that if you rely on a teacher or a guru, you will become in some way lazy. You will not do the hard work. So there is a very important parallel here. But I think that with Plato there's a little bit of a political thing going on, even though Socrates is the worst politician ever. The political thing being that we are to be brought to a very sensitive moral lesson. And this is the kind of thing that you have to discern yourself. It cannot really be forced on you. Socrates tried it. He was killed. Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about the Republic. So the Republic is broken up into 10 books. I had you all skip book 1. I mean, book 1's great. I like it. It's just weird, and I don't know. I wanted us to get into the real meat of the Republic sooner. And book 2 does that. Book 1 almost reads like a prologue. It's very strange. What's the main topic of the Republic? Cameron?
Like discussing Callipolis, like the city they're going to create.
In order to define what?
Justice.
Justice. So justice is the theme. The Callipolis is the route they decide. Justice is the theme. It's the big topic of the Republic. Book 1 is almost a standalone dialogue where Plato and some guys are talking about, they're defining justice. It's a pretty common model that we see in other dialogues of Plato. Not the ones that we've read so far in this class, but One of his dialogues, they define piety. Another one, they define virtue. And it's Socrates. The usual playbook is that Socrates presses a guy about a topic that everybody thinks they know, presses them to define it. They offer 3 definitions, and he rebuts them in turn until the person is confused. The term in Greek is called aporia, which means indecision. A lot of Plato's early dialogues end in indecision. They don't have a conclusion. You have to hunt for the conclusion. It's there, but you have to hunt for it. It's not clear. He doesn't give it to you on a silver palette. Again, this is tied to his philosophy of education, his idea that you must be the one to teach yourself. He's not going to give you the answer. And book 1 ends in aporia. Plato engages in a dialogue with a guy by the name of Thrasymachus, who is a sophist, very reminiscent of Callicles. In fact, he basically channels the same argument from Callicles. That's another reason I didn't have you read book 1. It's kind of a repetitive for you. But book 1's weird. He gets into this fight with Thrasymachus. He disputes 3 definitions and then says at the end of book 1, well, I don't know what justice is. Guess we're done. That's how book 1 ends. And book 2 starts with Glaucon and I think Polemarchus saying, wait a minute, we're not done. You didn't do anything. You're not done. We have a lot of questions here. We want to get to the bottom of justice. We have some more points we want to explore. So let's dive into this here. Let's dive into book 2. He opens up, let's see, the speakers here are Socrates, Glaucon, and Polemarchus. I don't know anything about these 2 guys. I'll be honest with you. Thrasymachus, pretty sure he's a sophist, but I don't really know Glaucon and Polemarchus. Again, these were people that Plato knew. They lived at the same time as he did, but I don't know what profession they were. So they open up here talking about justice, and they want to know something particular. They want to know what kind of good is justice? What kind of good? And what are the options? There are 3. What are the options, everybody? What kind of good is justice? Looking at the very opening of book 2 here. Someone get the ball rolling. What are the options? What kinds of good are there? What kind of good does Socrates want to say it's going to be? I know this language is vague, but you got to dive into the text to pull this apart. That's right, Anna, get the text. See, this is why you need to be sitting next to her, Cameron, so you can read the text. Lauren, go for it.
That it's the kind of good that is good both because the person enjoys it and because it is actually good for them in the long run.
Good. Okay. It's a little imprecise, but it's close. You're right on the edge.
So is that like the good for just doing the sake of doing good, for not the thing itself is good, like it could cause you harm, but in the end, the outcome will bring good.
Okay, there we go. To avert further confusion, because we could get lost in the weeds of the words here, I'm just gonna type it out right now. So here's the option. Is justice good for its results? Is justice a good in itself? Or is justice both good for its results and good in itself? I wonder if anybody knows. And this is, by the way, he comes to this around 357, 358, FYI lines. Anybody know what he's talking about here? Why are they making this distinction? Kelly.
I think they're trying to figure out why people should be just, even if they don't get any rewards from it. Would it still be beneficial for the person?
Okay, good, good, good. Anybody else? Is it fun being just? No. Just ask our president. It is not fun. It's a real pain. So, is justice the kind of good that you do just for the results, just for the outcome? Or is it possible that justice is something that is good in itself, that it is a good when you do it? Okay. Socrates' position is going to be that it's both. Okay. Glaucon, he disagrees. Okay. Glaucon says people don't really like justice. They don't want to be just. They just want the reputation. They just want the outcome. Okay. How does he know? What story does he tell? What story does Glaucon tell to prove, to make his point, that people really want injustice, but they want the results of justice? Great little thought experiment. What story does he tell? Gollum. Audra.
He tells the story of a man who was just his whole life, but was perceived as unjust, and then the man who was like completely unjust in everything that he did, but he had the appearance of being just. And he says that the man who is truly just but appears unjust will be like, whipped, beaten, prosecuted to the full extent of the law, even though he's been good the whole time, and then will come to realize that, oh, it was better to actually be unjust, because if I'm just but nobody knows it, then there's no point in being just, and then the person who is unjust but appears just will be like better in everything, and he'll have more riches and more things to give to his friends and more, available offerings to give to the gods, which means that he'll even get a better place in the afterlife than the person who was just his whole life, etc., etc. So then he's and he says it that he's not really taking this stance, but that he's just, or that he doesn't really believe his stance. He's just taking it to illustrate a point, or so that they can kind of get to the bottom of it. But from his discussion, it's kind of like, what is the point in being just if nobody knows it? Because if you appear just, it doesn't really matter whether you are or are not really just.
All right. Good. One of the things that, and by the way, I skipped over one of the speakers. There's a man by the name of Adeimantus who is going to speak presently, and he has a very important contention to make to Plato. And yes, part of what they're discussing is, look, Socrates, okay, maybe you think that justice is good in itself and good for its results, but most people don't think that way. The vast majority of people think that justice is a pain in the ass, that it's not a good in itself, that they're only doing it for the outcome. And by the way, what people truly want is injustice. Okay, Audrey, you're kind of looking already to Adeimantus's contribution. So let me deal with Glaucon first, because Glaucon he raises this iconic story in order to make his point that people really want injustice. You all seem like really nice people. I mean, I haven't met you in person. You seem really great, but you're all fucking evil inside, right? How do we know? How does Glaucon know? I know Lydia is so upset that I said this. I'm with you. We're all evil because Glaucon says What thought experiment should we consider?
Isn't that the one with the rings?
It's the rings. You think you're a good person. We all think you may have a saintly mother. Give her an invisible ring. She will go on a fucking tear. The invisible ring is his proof. The ring of Gyges. Who is this guy? Oh,
He was
Kelly.
a shepherd under Lydia.
He was a shepherd. He finds this ring, much like, who's the Hobbit? I already forgot his name. Bilbo Baggins. Yeah. I told you before. This is where the inspiration. This is where J.R.R. Tolkien got the inspiration from. And it's interesting. I haven't read The Hobbit in centuries, but now that I think about it, there is a similar moral lesson. See, when Glaucon raises this story, by the way, he made up this story. This story does not pre-exist Plato. He pretends like, well, I've heard a myth. No, there's no fucking myth. You made up this myth. But it's a very potent myth. And he tells it for a moral point. And J.R.R. Tolkien has a similar moral point, if I remember correctly, So Gyges finds this ring. Gyges is a relatively good, humble dude. He gets this ring that makes him invisible. What does he do with it?
Doesn't he kill the king?
He kills the king and
Seduces his wife.
seduces his wife, which makes perfect sense because he's invisible, right? Makes no sense at all. But in any case, the point being, what would you do if you were invisible? I don't want to know. Don't tell me. Because I'm sure it's sick. It'll start out innocently, right? That's Tolkien's point. It'll start out innocently. It'll start out with the best of intentions. But then slowly you'll make excuses for yourself like Bilbo Baggins, I think. And rob a Michaels.
I remember from The Hobbit, this is kind of not really philosophy, super philosophy related, but he's doing it to escape some sort of like cave, which is funny because it's, the cave in the book. But I think that to Plato's point, it clouds what is just and unjust, and proves and Socrates proves his point further, if that makes sense. I don't know. But I remember making that connection to The Hobbit and being like, I think it's different in The Hobbit because he's doing it out of a necessity. It's different to what Socrates is saying because Bilbo Baggins is doing it for safety and like to save his friends. I don't know.
That's
But
right? Doesn't he get a little careless later on?
But he does get like, and then he doesn't want to admit that he actually had a special ring. He just wants to act as though he saved everyone and escaped because he like was smart and quick-witted, but he actually didn't admit it. So that's an issue as well.
I mean, Robert, you're not serious you would rob a Michaels, right? Would you guys? Are you guys really into that?
I'm very serious.
Yeah.
Our supplies are too expensive.
You guys are hilarious. Michaels. I hate going there with my daughter. Anyway, I mean, I go back to the point, he does slaughter Room of Goblins first half hour of owning it. Well, that was probably a good reason, but you guys remember much more than I do. I have some vague recollection that he makes excuses. I mean, you would think about it. If you had a ring that made you invisible, you'd like show off after a while, right? You'd be like, oh, guess who's here, right? Take the ring off, and your friends would be like, whoa, how the hell did you get here? Well, I was here the whole time. That's gross. What were you doing? you might make excuses to steal things. And the point is, you think I'm wrong? No, this is your homework. After class, sit outside, meditate for an hour on what it's like to have an invisible ring. You will be dragged to hell. Okay. And that's Glaucon's point. Like, there is this inner evil in us. I don't mean evil in the theological sense. So I don't want to get, maybe I'll use a different word. Like, we have this fundamental temptation inside us that, what we really want, it's his point. What we really want is injustice. We don't really want to be just. We really want injustice. Okay. Lydia. Okay. Well, I backed off of evil here. And, you can disagree with them. I think it's a persuasive thought experiment. It's okay. Maybe you don't think that way. That's fine.
No, I agree too. It's just like, a lot of these people just don't take into account like anything but like their absolute idea of what's correct. And I feel like there's so much complexity to human nature that like you just can't talk in absolutes.
Well, I don't think we need to get hung up on absolutes here necessarily. I mean, we could talk about, a majority of people. What's interesting is that, does this speak to a lot of people? Does this capture some kind of hidden truth for most people? Are we easily tempted? I hear what you're saying. Just trying to navigate that fine line here. I mean, all I would say is, I think the story of Gyges' ring is, it captures, I think, the people. I think it captures the experience of people, and it's enough to make Glaucon's point. Like, if we did not have to, if we could get away with it, how often would we be unjust? How often would we commit these kinds of wrongs, these offenses, if we get away with it? And Glaucon thinks we would do it plenty. It just makes the point for him that justice is not something we want to do. Okay, it's not something we enjoy. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on here, and just get into Adeimantus, because I want to build to the two of these guys together, get to Socrates the ultimate challenge that will frame the whole republic. Adeimantus comes in with the point that Audrey was making here earlier, which is largely about, how people tend to view justice and injustice. And for this, like the common opinion of justice and injustice. And for this, he talks about Greek religion, and he talks about Homer. And, we're going to have to talk about this plenty in this class. Homer, you all know Homer. He wrote the Odyssey, and he wrote the Iliad. Oops, I misspelled that. Sorry. The Iliad. The Iliad is the story of when the Greek city-states went to attack the city of Troy, which is now we know is in Western Turkey. They found the foundations of it. And it was a concerted effort where they all went there to release that city, to save Helen of Troy, who she was kidnapped, I believe, by Paris, if I recall correctly. And then that's the Iliad. And then the Odyssey is a story of Odysseus trying to make his way home after the siege of Troy. And it takes him several years and many detours. These are examples of what we call epic poetry. They were part of an oral tradition for a very long time until they were written down by Homer. I forget when, I think around the 700s BC. They are widely considered to be classical Greek literature still today. I have a friend who's Greek. He tells me that in kindergarten, Greek children have to learn the opening of the Iliad. Homer, what do we get here? We get mythical stories and stories of the gods, right? Then there is Hesiod, and he chronicles, my spelling, sorry guys. We will talk about some of the Greek myths today. Again, the myths were also part of the myths of the Greek gods. They were also part of an oral tradition. Being part of an oral tradition means that there were very different versions of them, different accounts. We're going to talk about one myth in particular in a bit that has a couple different accounts. And Hesiod also decides at a certain point, okay, I'm going to write some of these down. And when he writes them down, he kind of says that these are the definitive accounts. So what do we get here? When Plato references Homer and Hesiod, he's talking essentially about the intersection of Greek culture and religion. And it is in any culture, it's hard to pull these two apart, right? Literature and religion, they go together. So Adeimantus, in his addition to this conversation about justice, he talks about the Greek religion and literature, and he wants to talk about what Greek religion teach about justice and injustice. What does he point out about that? So these guys are talking, the discussion they're having here now is, what kind of good is justice? Is it the kind of good you want in itself or only for its results or outcomes? Glaucon says people really want to be just, they want to be unjust, and they want to seem just. And Adeimantus agrees and says that the religion of the Greeks bears this out. How so? Anybody remember what example he gives to prove that people, what they really want is injustice, but they want the reputation for justice? Anybody remember what example he gives?
Isn't this where he talked about the just man being killed because he appears unjust? The unjust man surviving because he has a reputation as being just?
Well, okay, but he talks about some religious stories in particular.
I think he mentioned some people who commit unjust actions to have personal gain and then go to a priest and confess their sins and then, claim that they're forgiven and have the reputation of being just and regretting his actions. And so he's like taking advantage on both ends a little bit.
Excellent. And what does Adeimantus relate about the afterworld? What do we call this? The underworld? Hades. What does he relate about the Greek depictions of the underworld? If you're virtuous, what do you get? What's your reward?
Elysium.
Elysium, okay. What you gonna be doing in Elysium?
Paradise for eternity, at least in some interpretation.
Well, he's complaining about one account in particular. May notice one account of Hades, what the good do and what happens to the evil. And this is Hesiod he's quoting. Oh, and Homer back and forth. What do they depict? What is your reward in Hades if you're good? Nobody sees it?
Are you referring to the part where he talks about them just like sitting around drinking?
That's it.
Yeah.
Getting drunk. This is 363D. In their stories, they lead the just to Hades, seat them on couches, provide them with a symposium of pious people. This is the good people. The good people. They lead them to Hades. seat them on couches, provide them with the supposed pious people, crown them with wreaths, and make them spend all their time drinking, as if they thought drunkenness was the finest wage of virtue. So why should you be good your whole life? So you can get fucking wasted for eternity. Adamantis is saying that's crazy, right? But it's true, right? Like Glaucon's right. You know, people want, what they really want is to be unjust. But they want the reputation of justice because there are certain benefits that come with that. And then he goes on and says, yeah, on the next page, I think Kieran points this out. He says, this is a quote from Homer. The gods, this is 364E. The gods themselves can be swayed by prayer, and with sacrifices and soothing promises, incense and libations, human beings turn them from their purpose when someone has transgressed and sinned. Very similar to if you guys had all learned, you know, about the causes of the Reformation. The Catholic Church got in trouble for selling, what's the word? Anybody remember what the word is? If you sinned, you could buy forgiveness, basically. That's exactly what he's referencing here. You know that if you are bad, you know, you can just buy your way into heaven. And these are, look, and these, you know, we see some themes recurring here without getting into too many details. We see themes recurring here. You know, think about popular representations of heaven. Maybe drunkenness is a little bit strong. Something like reparations, indulgences. Thank you, Sonny. You know, popular representations of the afterlife of heaven. You know, this is an extreme representation, you know, that your reward for a life of virtue and chastity and moderation is going to be that you get to be smashed for eternity, you know, and maybe there will be some orgies thrown in. I don't know. I just made that up. But the general point is that people don't really prize justice. They don't really prize justice. They prize injustice. That's what they yearn for. But they want the reputation of justice. And so this leads them to their challenge to Socrates. They say to Socrates, this is on 366D, 367A. They say to him, okay, listen, you know, I'm not going to read this whole quote. It's kind of a big one here, but it's pretty essential. You know, not only do we want you to define justice, you have to do something else. You have to prove that it is worthwhile in itself, that it is enjoyable in itself. As they say on 367A, right? They talk about it, justice, prove to us that justice is the greatest good in the soul. Prove to us that justice is not only worth pursuing for its results, but that it's a good in itself, and that the just soul is the best and happiest soul. Okay? That's the challenge. Keep that in mind. That's the task of the Republic. It's not just defining justice, but it's proving the rest. Before we get there, though, they will have to define justice. And in order to define justice, Plato says, we have to build a city. Why? Why did they choose this route to define justice?
They find justice to be different from an individual and from a city. They want to see the similarities of the two to see what's the core of it.
Good. Samantha.
The city would have all of like their ideals of the perfect, like the just person. So they would regulate things that they don't think are just, so that those that live in that city are all just people.
Okay. Right. So the goal is to see it in the soul. That's how they said it, right? They start the contention is first tell us about prove to us that it's worthwhile as a goal for an individual person, that justice does good to the soul. And Plato says to do that, we need to see it in the city. Okay. And as you guys kind of indicated here, basically the task is, well, as Kelly indicated, soul, there's going to be an analogy between justice in the soul and justice in the city, and that in fact there's going to be some kind of identity. And you might say it's hard to understand how a soul can be just without a city being just. But he also tells us famously right around here, 367, he says we want to see justice. If we're going to define justice, we need to see it writ large. We need to see it big first. And in order to see it big, we will start with a city. Okay. And of course, not just any city, but the best city, the Kallipolis. Sorry, I'm typing. Polis. Kallipolis. Kalon in Greek means beautiful. So a Kallipolis is the beautiful city. Okay, that's how they will refer to it sometimes. That's how I'm going to refer to it, the Kallipolis. This is what they are going to build. Before we dive into this, let me pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions so far. Questions or comments or issues with anything? Lauren.
The whole thing becomes very authoritarian very quickly.
All right. Anybody else? Well, let's get this out of the way. Plato does not like democracy. Okay, it's all right. We'll deal with that later. We'll deal with that later. That's coming. Anybody have any questions about what we've covered so far?
Hello. Oh, I was just gonna say that my confusion with it is why he's creating this whole like idealized and unrealistic utopia as an example of what justice would play out like, because we know that utopias are like unattainable because of human nature. So then how does the ideas expressed through it like actually apply to like real societies and people?
Why build? So excellent, Anna. I skipped over this point. This is a utopia he's going to build. This is one of the earliest examples of utopian writing in the West. It seems to have been a popular hobby among the Greeks. There were several Greek philosophers who wrote their own republics. This is the only one I've ever read. This is by far the best known. I'm not even sure if the others exist. Why build a utopia? Anybody have any thoughts? Why construct a utopia? What's the point?
I think like they probably wanted to I don't know, because I am hesitant to use like absolutes, but they wanted to see like what it would play out as a framework so they can like consider their own condition and like the cities that we live in within the like with knowing a utopia, like kind of having something to compare their life to maybe.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think part of the answer is coming, Anna. Why? Why do this? I go back to the point that he is going to see a very strong analogy between the individual and the city. Stronger than we maybe anticipate or expect. But something occurred to me here. I could give this idea, which is if we were in the classroom at Micah, I would point out to the city of Baltimore around us and say, look, can you see justice here, right? And Baltimore is notably absent of justice. So if you wanted to use a city to define justice, you're going to have to build a utopia. I could see that being one answer. Not sure that's the one, but that's one answer. You know, but it's also an excuse to, I think Robert hits on it there in his comment, you know, like this is an excuse to really, I think Plato is being a little devilish, you know. No utopia is utopia. There's something wrong with utopian thinking. And I always read Plato as offering that kind of backhanded critique. But here's the point. We'll see this when we get to book 5. Why is he writing about utopia? Because he was surrounded, or let me say this, the Athenians were confronted with a very potent utopia or utopian society. In many ways, Sparta, their enemy, was utopian, at least in the ways that Plato understands it. And so part of what Plato is, you know, reason Plato is doing is because maybe utopian thinking is not completely outlandish. Competitors are engaging in this. We better dabble here and see if this is what we want, right? And of course, it's always instructive to engage in thought experiments and consider what the ideals would look like when they play out. Good. All right, well, let's dive in here. So the city, you know, how do cities come together? How do they start, everybody? What's the original reason a group of people come together and form a city? What does it start with?
For utility, to function with each other's needs.
Excellent. He says no one is self-sufficient, so you need everybody else. So people get together, and then the next step he says is, that's the very beginning. The very next step says, well, if you want the city to work efficiently, what is going to happen to labor in this city? They are led to the question of labor. Why? What's their question about labor? What distinguishes an efficient city from an inefficient one, Lauren?
It's inefficient for someone like a farmer to be fulfilling all of his various labor needs. Like a farmer needs to be focusing entirely on farming, not on building a house, not on building his tools, things like that. Like everybody needs to have a specific craft that they devote their entire being to.
Awesome. What do we call this, everybody? Do you guys know what this is called? Everybody does something different to be part of the whole. In economics, yeah, thank you, Lauren. In economics, we also talk about division of labor. This is the bedrock principle of Plato's Utopia. Everybody's gonna be far more efficient if you focus on one thing and that guy focused on another and she focused on something else, as opposed to everybody, as opposed to you being responsible for everything. Now, you know, your food, your clothes, your shoes, your car, your house, okay? Key question. How will we decide in this ideal city? How will we decide what jobs people do? Do you know what I mean? We're going to make this as efficient as possible. Not only will labor be divided, but how will that decision process go?
It would go by what people are naturally better at.
Can you say that again, Kelly?
It'll go naturally to the people who are better at specific things.
Excellent. All right. So you're right. So my question, farmers, what makes for naturally better farmers? Weird question, no? Actually, the section that Kelly has in mind is 370 AB. That's where they talk about this, right? He says, each one, this is actually 370B, but each of us differs somewhat in nature from the others, one being suited to one task, another to another. Second, does one person do a better job if he practices many crafts, or since he's one person himself, as he practices one, he practices one? Now, what we're talking about here at the basic economic level of this city is we're talking about the artisans. And the people we know so far, he's mentioned farmers. Anybody know what other artisan classes he's mentioned? In book 2?
Weavers.
Weavers.
Cobblers.
Cobblers. What are cobblers?
People that make shoes, right?
There's 3 left in Baltimore, probably. Cobblers, weavers, bakers, butchers. All right, my question for you is natural aptitude? What is the natural aptitude for a baker, y'all? What's the natural aptitude for a butcher? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
This part kind of like, it reminds me of like a little bit of like The Giver, in that like as a child you can show certain interests in certain things.
This is less about interests and it's more about talents and just your nature. What I mean by nature is your physical and maybe emotional nature. I'm going to get this out of the way right now. This is not politically correct. This is the opposite of politically correct. Let me show you something. You see this hand here? See my hand? No calluses, short, stocky fingers. In Plato's universe, this is not the hand of a farmer. I have a cousin who is a farmer. His hand is like this. It's like his fingers are like much bigger than mine. And that helps him. You know why? Well, he has sheep. He can grab his sheep with one hand or a bale of hay with one. Me, I have to two-hand it. And I'm like chasing him around the farm, sweaty in my chinos. Like, I just can't, penny loafers. I can't, He's got shoulders like this. It's not just physical natures, though. It's also like, it's like your emotional, intellectual capacity as well. Like I'm a very impatient person, right? And that makes me bad at many things, Oh, just to go back in a second, like my hand is kind of middle. Like this is not a farmer's hand. This is not a cobbler's hand, right? Cobblers or a weaver, or I don't know, maybe thinking old-fashioned cobblers, they had to sew leather, Again, this is not a popular way of thinking about things today, because now we're told that the American ideology is, you can do anything, you can be anything you want. Plato's message, the ancient Greek message, is quite different. For the ancient Greeks, their thinking is what we refer to as, essentialism. What that means is basically that you have an essence, and this essence determines what you should do in life. And if you would be happy, you should pay attention to your nature and what it tells you should do. Now, you all, I've taught artists for many years. You all are largely already in that boat, right? Why are you here? Why are you at Micah? Well, you're all in your room. Sorry. Why are you? Why were you trying to get to Micah? Right? You couldn't be anywhere else. Could you see yourself in accounting school, law school? You'd fucking kill yourself, right? You had to be in art school. I actually think that you all are a pretty good indication of what Plato means by nature. I am not an artist. I do not have the temperament. I do not have the patience. I've seen what you guys do over the years. It takes a tremendous amount of patience. I'm kind of amazed at the patience you all have. Plato's point is, you know, this kind of open-ended freedom is deceiving and incorrect and actually not very helpful. It's better if we recognize what our nature is, what our natural dispositions are, and we try to understand what we should do. Now, admittedly, he takes us to an extreme, okay? As we will see. We'll see this shortly enough, okay? He's going to insist on the rule that in this ideal city, there be no crossover. People do what they are best at. And when they do what they are best at, things will move most efficiently. In this ideal city, you should be an artist. Don't fuck around. Don't think, oh, I'm going to be a baker too. Fuck that. No, you may not. You will be inefficient. Leave that to the bakers, the butchers. The added point is that you should do what your strength is because you're going to find that to be the most pleasant. But that's not the main point here because Plato's not interested in the individual. He's not interested in individual happiness. He's interested in the happiness of the whole. And the whole is happier when everybody does what they're best at. Okay? And your nature determines that. Your nature is the point. I'm going to keep moving here. If this city is highly efficient, then this city is going to be rich. And if this city is rich, what do we need? What does a rich city need, everybody? Did you all hear me? Sorry, I saw my internet was unstable. Cameron?
Disposable working class to be exploited.
Well, sure, but that's for Marx to answer later. What's Plato's response? Rich city, what do you need?
A place to put money?
Money? Sure. Lauren?
You need soldiers to protect said city.
And not only protect the city, but what? It's a rich city. What do rich cities like to do? Huh? They like to expand.
Oh.
They need more resources. You're going to need an army, the guardians, exactly. Okay, we have two classes in this ideal city. We have the city of artisans and the guardians. And these are two distinct These are two distinct classes. Why? The guardians are not artisans. The guardians got their own thing going. They have a unique nature and they have to be doing something completely different. The guardians will not be farming. They will not be baking. They will not be butchering. What will the guardians be doing with their time, everybody? In order to be the best guardians, they must practice and train nonstop. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's back up a second. I indicated a second ago that it is a fundamental premise of the Republic that there's division of labor and that people do what they are best at according to their nature. What is the nature of the guardians? How do you know? What are the proper traits of a guardian?
Probably strong.
Strength. What else? Strong body and morals. What else? To be gentle towards they must protect, and to be aggressive against those they must defend against. Love it, Sonny. What kind of animal must they be like, everyone?
A dog.
Dog. Guardians must be like dogs. Why?
Because even though like their owner might not give them like presents or something, they're still loyal to them, but they're still aggressive to strangers.
Loyal to their own. Thank you. I wanted to just take Sonny's point up a notch. They are loyal, if not protective of their owner, and vicious towards their enemies. That's the point. They need to be like dogs. Okay. This is 375A and 375C. Gentle to friends, harsh to enemies. Sonny, is everything okay? You're waving at me?
Sorry, just waving at Cameron.
Okay. Good. I know we're almost there. Let's just take this a little bit further. And so, leading us up to next week for what we're going to really dive into is this topic of the training of the guardians. The guardians have this is a unique and special nature. These are soldiers, right? These are soldiers. We need them to be loyal to their own and vicious to their enemies. Is it easy for them to turn off that switch? Anybody here been to war? Yeah, I didn't think so. What do you think? Do you think it's easy for soldiers to turn off that switch to be vicious to their enemies, friendly to their own? No, this is a highly unique nature. This is a very special nature. That's why I think they're a class all to their own. They can't be like everybody else, right? You see this all the time in soldiers when they come back from war and the kind of PTSD, the trauma that they suffer, right? The challenge of reinserting themselves into the everyday lives of everyone else. This is so difficult because of what they've been asked, indeed expected to do. So the training of these guys with this very special nature is going to be a very unique topic all its own. I'll just edge us into this before we break. They are going to be studying, let's see here, about things they're going to be studying. He talks about the stories that they're raised on. And he says to us at 377A, he says they're going to learn both true stories and false stories, but they're going to learn false stories first. Guardians will learn the false stories first. What the hell does he mean by that? Little crude way of putting it. What do you think he means by false stories?
Probably like myths and stories about the gods where it's not necessarily like a first-hand experience and not really something that mortals could or should do at all. Yeah.
Good. So he puts thank you, Audra. He puts a little crudely. Why do you think, but I'll follow him. I'll take the bait. Why would we want to teach children? Why would we want to teach our kids false stories as opposed to true stories? What's wrong with true stories? Potentially. Why do we treat our kids to false stories? I'm talking about our kids, none of you.
True stories might teach.
Huh? Sorry?
True stories might convince them of negative traits.
What do you mean?
Like, for instance, I know like later on they were talking about how Homer would talk as if he was one of the gods in the story, and he finds them not to be good because the gods are not that great of people sometimes.
Okay, well, hang on. We'll deal with that in just 1 second. That's the next point coming. But the general point is we have to teach the guardians, just as we tend to do. We all tend to teach children. We all tend to teach children false stories as opposed to true stories. And Audra submits, what do we mean by false stories? Maybe fables, maybe myths, tall tales, whatnot, right? I don't know, what kind of children's stories, y'all? What are some popular children's stories? Give an example today. What do we have? Yes. I was thinking of the stories of Grimm, right? The brothers Grimm. Every culture has different stories, but you have a host of like Little Red Riding Hood. You have these stories that that we tend to teach kids in an attempt to shield them from truth. But Socrates, immediately when he gets into this issue of false stories that we want to teach the guardians first, he says, the problem is, there's a problem with the false stories that are already popular right now in Athens. And he zeroes in on a couple. What is wrong? What is wrong with the stories, the false stories that the Greeks are hearing? Lauren.
They praise being unjust, sort of in a similar way to what Glaucon was talking about earlier, as in like, even if you're unjust, as long as you're cunning and you get away with it, like, look at all these wonderful lives.
Awesome. Around 378, he mentions actually one of the stories by Hesiod, and this is the story of, if you have my translation, it's translated a little strange, but basically Uranus and Kronos. He referenced that. That's 378a. And this is where we will end today. Does anybody know the story of Uranus and Kronos and why he objects to this story? Audra knows vaguely. Patricide. Yeah. No, actually, no patricide. Much worse. No? Anybody? No? Anybody? Anybody? All right. I got it right here. Thanks to Wikipedia, I'm going to tell you quickly. First off, this is a classic example where there are a variety of different versions in the oral tradition, and Hesiod pins down a specific story. This is about, by the way, this is about the genealogy of the gods, okay? Maybe I should post a genealogy of the gods on our website, on our Canvas site, so you can see the Greek gods, by the way. We have briefly touched on the Greek gods. We're going to get into a little more, in the Republic. So you have the grandparents of the gods, Uranus and Gaia. These are the two. Okay. Uranus is busy hiding the children of Gaia. And Gaia gets mad and says to her son, Kronos, come here. I don't like what this guy's up to. I'm fed up with him hiding my children. Here is a gigantic sickle. You guys know what a sickle is? A sickle. Anybody want to guess what he did with the sickle? Kronos? What did she want him to do with the sickle? Worse than patricide. No? No exciting guesses? What's worse than patricide to manly men? Sunny's getting it because of the way she's looking at me. Anybody want to guess? No?
Demasculating.
There you go. Well, I have a very poor picture of it here. I will post it on Canvas, but this is a picture of Kronos demasculating his father with a sickle. Get a little closer there, see? This is called the mutilation of Uranus by Saturn. Saturn would have been the Greek name, the Roman name, the Latin name for Kronos. So that's how Kronos exerted his revenge on his father for hiding his brothers and sisters. He mutilated him. According to one story, he takes the severed testes and flings them into the sea, and they foam up and Aphrodite emerges. That's one story. Well, then after he has dispatched his father, I guess maybe he did kill him, although that Wikipedia is being a little cagey here. He definitely gets him out of the way. He re-imprisons his brothers, bastard. And then he and his sister, Rhea, they take the throne. Kronos and Rhea, these are the mother and father of the Greek gods of what we call the pantheon. And this pantheon, these are the guys we talked about before. You got Zeus, Apollo, Poseidon, Demeter, blah, blah, Hera, blah, blah. Okay, Athena. I'll post it online for us. And here is where it gets even better. So Kronos, after learning from his own story in his own life, decides, oh my God, these kids I'm hanging with Rhea, they are going to fucking betray me. So guess what he does? What does he do? Anybody know what he does? Eats them. Audra. Virtual high five. He eats his children as any good parent would do, of course. Trying to see if I have a tasty picture. All my imagery is analog. Here is the example of, this is from Rubens. This is Kronos eating his children. There's a very famous picture also by nom nom nom, nice. Goya, the Spanish painter Goya. Raises a great question. Why the fuck would Goya paint that, you know? Goya's is much more graphic. Kronos devours his children in turn. Blah, 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 eats them all. Rhea's like, what the fuck, man? This is hard work. She finally has one kid named Zeus. She's like, you ain't gonna get this one. She takes a stone, wraps it in swaddling cloth, boom, eats it. Zeus, he hides. She hides, that is. She hides Zeus on this little island in a cave on Crete. I love this story. According to some versions of the story, he was then raised by a goat while a company of dancers shouted and clapped their hands every time he cried so that Kronos wouldn't hear him. Love that. When he grows up, I know that's the best part, Robert. When he grows up, Rhea's like, come here. You gotta go get your brothers and sisters. This is the weirdest part of the story. She gives him an emetic. An emetic is something that makes people throw up. He secretly gives it to his father, Kronos, and Kronos throws up the gods in turn, whole. Blah, Aphrodite, blah, Hera, blah, Athena, grody, right? Plato is not cool with this. How can this be? Not Aphrodite. Sorry. Thank you, Robert. How could this be? Yeah, look, I'm not a sticker for detail here. You get the general picture. The general picture is this is a moral abomination. This is not the kind of false story that the guardians should hear. This is not the kind of false story that we should have in a utopia, in our ideal city. In fact, this is exactly the wrong kind of story you need to be telling kids. They need to be raised on something entirely different. You guys are all being such sticklers about these myths. Sorry. And on 378 C and E, he says, in general, the Greek myths right now are just they're bad all in all, because they portray the gods in such a negative fashion. The Iliad, Homer's Iliad. Homer, now this is the great classic of Greek literature. He's attacking that too. Homer depicts the gods fighting with each other. Well, this will not do. This will not do at all. And Zeus? I mean, this is ridiculous too. The king of the gods. I think we talked about this. What is Zeus's favorite hobby, everybody?
Rape.
Rape. He's a serial rapist. We talked about this, right? He likes to change form to rape. He'll take the form of a bull. He'll take the form of golden showers. He takes the form of a swan. Very kinky, right? Which is why the guys go on in the rest of this chapter in book 2 to say things like, they have a list of recommendations for the myths in their ideal city. And a couple of these recommendations are the gods in these myths, they must be wholly good. Okay. They can't be raping bastards on one hand and at the same time that they're good. And they don't change shape. This is 380 CD. This is a direct dig at Zeus. All right. These gods, the false stories that we will have in the ideal city that are truly beneficial from a moral standpoint, they do not depict gods that are bickering, that are vicious, that are violent, that are jealous, and that change shape to meddle in human affairs, in the basest human affairs. That is all got to go. In other words, what do we have in this ideal city? We have censorship. We have censorship. These are not appropriate. So I'm going to have to leave it here, but this discussion of censorship is not done. Book 3 takes it up from a different vantage point. Book 3 starts Plato's very interesting philosophy of art, where he discusses art as a form of imitation and how that meshes with his claims of human nature in book 2. Also talks about his critique of poetry, and he has a very interesting critique of visual art, which I like very much, actually. I think it's very interesting. Not a critique so much as it is a recommendation. But I'm going to end it there. Okay, everybody. So that's it for today. Next week, we will discuss book 3. You will finish reading book 3. You will also read all of book 4. And that's all I need to say to everybody. Okay. So if you want to stick around and chat with me, I am going to stick around too. Okay. All right. Have a good week, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Hello, do you guys have questions? Hello? Samantha? Otto?